Welcome back to Shannon Henry, the channel where we break down the world's most defining military and geopolitical events in real, honest detail. If this is your first time here, I'm glad you found us. We don't do surface-level summaries here. We go deep. Today's story is one I've been waiting to cover because it is genuinely one of the most consequential military operations in modern history. A weapon never before used in combat, tunnels buried hundreds of meters beneath mountains and the ocean floor, a doctrine 40 years in the making, and a single operation that dismantled all of it. Let's get into it. For decades, Iran built its military confidence around something most armies in the world could not realistically counter. Not aircraft carriers, not advanced fighter jets. Iran's true strategic power was buried underground, literally hidden from the world. Deep beneath mountain ranges, reinforced behind layers of concrete, and tucked beneath the seabed along its coastline, Iran had constructed what it called missile cities. These were massive underground tunnel networks stretching dozens of kilometers, housing hundreds of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, mobile launchers, ammunition depots, and command centers. All invisible to the outside world, all seemingly untouchable by any conventional military strike, and that invisibility was entirely by design. The tunnel systems were engineered to defeat detection. Some sections descended to depths between 100 and 500 meters underground. Certain portions of these tunnels ran directly beneath the ocean floor along Iran's coastline, completely submerged and shielded from any aerial surveillance. Inside these facilities sat some of Iran's most dangerous weapons, including the Karar 380L cruise missile. This is a weapon capable of flying just above the surface of the ocean to evade radar, with a strike range of over 1,000 kilometers. A single one of these missiles, launched from the coastal base near Bandar Abbas, could reach targets from Oman all the way to Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE. And here is the detail that makes this even more alarming. These missiles were not stationary. Iran had built mobile rail systems running through the tunnel networks. Launchers could roll out from a tunnel entrance, fire, and disappear back underground in seconds, nearly impossible to detect, nearly impossible to neutralize in real time. But the most terrifying element of this system was not the firepower itself. It was the strategy built around it. Iran's plan was never simply to threaten commercial shipping. The tankers were bait. The real target was the United States Navy. The strategy worked like this: force the U.S. to intervene by closing the Strait of Hormuz to civilian vessels. Let global oil prices explode. Let international pressure build until Washington feels it has no choice but to act. Then, when American warships sail into that narrow 21-meter-wide passage to reopen the strait, hit them simultaneously from the shore, from underground tunnel systems, and from beneath the water, sink an American destroyer, damage an aircraft carrier, break the American will to continue the fight, the same way Vietnam broke it, the same way Somalia broke it, inflict enough casualties and the U.S. withdraws. The Strait of Hormuz was a trap. The commercial ships were the bait. The U.S. Navy was always the intended target, and those coastal tunnels were the trigger designed to spring that trap shut. Iran had spent 40 years and billions of dollars engineering this moment. Hundreds of kilometers of tunnels carved into mountain ranges, thousands of missiles buried 80 to 90 meters underground, launch pads concealed, command centers sealed. The regime was so confident in this underground infrastructure that they told their own people to mentally prepare for a 5-year war. This was Iran's ultimate deterrent, the weapon system that was supposed to make any serious military confrontation unwinnable for any opponent bold enough to try. And then one night changed everything. Now, before I go further, I genuinely want to hear from you in the comments. First question, before learning about this operation, did you actually believe that underground tunnel systems buried hundreds of meters deep could be neutralized in just a matter of days? What was your honest assumption about how invulnerable these facilities were? How you answer that reveals something fascinating about the gap between perceived military power and what modern precision warfare has proven capable of. Drop your answer below. I read every comment and I want to know what you thought going in. On March 17th, U.S. Central Command publicly confirmed that reinforced underground tunnels and coastal missile facilities along Iran's coastline near the Strait of Hormuz had been struck by a weapon that had never once been used in actual combat. The GBU-72, a 5,000-pound deep penetrating bomb. And that confirmation came alongside evidence of what military analysts were already calling one of the most precisely executed strike operations in recorded history. But before a single bomb was released, the mission's success depended entirely on one thing: making sure Iran could not see it coming. That night, under darkness and low-hanging cloud cover, the strike package moved in. At the front of the formation were EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft, arguably the most advanced airborne jamming platforms ever built. Their mission was singular: blind every radar system and sever every communication network along Iran's coastline, making the entire incoming strike package invisible to any Iranian detection system. With the Growlers running that interference, Iran's defensive eyes were effectively switched off. Behind them came the bombers, B-1B Lancer aircraft launched from long-range bases, while F-15E Strike Eagles lifted off from regional installations, most likely Muwafaq Salti in Jordan or Al Udeid in Qatar. Both platforms were armed with the GBU-72. This weapon weighs 2.3 metric tons, 2.5 times the weight of standard military munitions. But its defining characteristic is not simply its mass. It is what the bomb does after it makes contact with the Earth. The GBU-72 does not detonate on the surface. It buries itself into the ground, drives more than 50 meters deep, and then detonates from within, collapsing the structure around it from the inside. When that detonation occurs inside a tunnel corridor, the blast wave has nowhere to go. It becomes trapped within the passage, amplifying its destructive force far beyond anything it could achieve in open air. A single GBU-72 entering through a tunnel entrance renders everything in its path, all the way to the launch gallery at the corridor's end, completely and permanently unusable. F-15E Strike Eagles use GPS-guided precision to drive their bombs directly into tunnel entrances, only several meters wide. A single B-1B Lancer, carrying up to 34 tons of ordnance in one sortie, could collapse multiple entrances in a single pass. And for the most heavily fortified deep targets, B-2 Spirit stealth bombers arrived carrying the GBU-57, a 14-ton bunker buster of almost incomprehensible destructive power. The targets that night were the IRGC Navy's underground missile complexes, hidden along the mountainous coastline near Bandar Abbas, the facilities the Iranian military itself had proudly called missile cities. By the time dawn came, those cities no longer existed as functional military assets. Now let me address the question I know is forming in your mind right now, because it is a legitimate and important one. Iran claimed these tunnels reached depths of 100 to 500 meters underground. The GBU-72 penetrates only 50 meters. So how did the U.S. Air Force actually destroy these launch facilities? The answer lies in a piece of thinking that is almost elegant in its simplicity, and it is the kind of strategic clarity that separates dominant military planning from pure brute force. The United States did not need to reach the bottom of the tunnels. Consider what launching a missile actually requires. You cannot fire a ballistic missile from 300 meters underground. At some point, That missile must reach the surface. That means tunnel entrances, exit corridors, and shallow launch galleries. Every one of those critical choke points sits within 50 meters of the surface. That is precisely where every bomb was aimed. Think of it this way. You may not be able to tear down every wall of a castle, but if you collapse the gate, it does not matter how many soldiers are still inside. That army can hold its ground within those walls indefinitely, but it cannot emerge, it cannot engage, it cannot fight. The missiles buried 300 meters underground may remain perfectly intact, but if every route to the surface has been sealed by rubble, those weapons are nothing more than extremely expensive, completely useless metal. They exist in the dark, they simply cannot function. That realization, that Iran's greatest source of military confidence contained a fundamental structural vulnerability it had never fully accounted for, was perhaps the most devastating strategic insight of the entire operation. But the coastal strikes were only the opening move. Operation Epic Fury had officially begun on February 28, 2026, and its most devastating phase arrived on March 2nd, when the full weight of American strategic air power was redirected toward two inland targets that represented the absolute core of Iran's land-based deterrence capability. The first was the Imam Ali base near Khorramabad in Loristan province, Iran's single largest ballistic missile complex, a subterranean city carved entirely into mountain rock, with tunnel networks stretching between 36 and 50 kilometers in total length. Within this underground labyrinth sat hundreds of Shahab-3 variant ballistic missiles, concealed launch pads, lined ammunition depots. This facility was the backbone of Iran's regional deterrent posture, the crown jewel of everything the regime had spent 40 years building underground. The second target was near Tabriz in East Azerbaijan province, home to a tunnel network exceeding 100 kilometers in length, the longest in Iran's entire underground arsenal. This complex had functioned as the primary source of the ballistic missiles Iran had previously launched at Erbil and the surrounding region. It had suffered heavy damage during operations in June 2025, but the regime had rebuilt it completely. It was operational again, and now it was next. The operation's architecture was designed around layered sequence destruction. In the opening phase, B-2 Spirit stealth bombers slipped silently into Iranian airspace, undetected because Iran's air defense network had already been rendered completely blind in the operation's first hours through coordinated cyber attacks and electronic warfare. These aircraft dropped the 30,000-pound GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, one of the most powerful conventional weapons in existence. The aerodynamic design of this weapon, combined with the kinetic energy built up during its descent, enables it to penetrate 60 meters of reinforced concrete and solid rock before detonating. On impact, it creates a seismic shock wave that causes irreversible structural fractures deep within tunnel systems, collapses and cracks that extend far beyond the immediate point of detonation. The main facility doors were obliterated, critical support columns were destroyed, and the personnel stationed hundreds of meters below ground had no awareness of any of it, because their radar screens showed nothing. In the second phase, B-1B Lancer aircraft arrived at supersonic speeds to hunt down and destroy any mobile air defense batteries attempting to come back online. This ensured Iran's surface-to-air systems could not recover during the attack. Then the B-52 Stratofortresses arrived, and they brought everything. Carrying thousands of pounds of JDAM smart munitions, the B-52s dismantled every surface support structure connected to both facilities. Ventilation shafts were targeted and collapsed. Communication antennas were destroyed. Power transmission lines were severed. Every surface building and logistics structure was eliminated. More than 8 main tunnel entrances at Khorramabad were buried in seconds. GBU-57s drove deep into the mountains and collapsed internal passageways. Enormous fireballs were ejected from within the mountain itself as ammunition depots inside the tunnels began chain reacting. NASA's firm's satellite thermal monitoring systems recorded extraordinary temperature spikes in the region, heat waves from underground detonations so intense they registered on orbital sensors. Khorramabad had fallen, and Tabriz fell with it. The 100-kilometer tunnel network, rebuilt after 2025 strikes, was sealed again. Entrances crushed, ventilation gone, power gone, elevator systems collapsed. The missiles inside and the personnel below them were completely separated from the surface world. Consider what that actually means at the human level for a moment. You are in a tunnel 80 meters underground. The lights go out. The air systems stop functioning. The ground shakes violently around you from bombs detonating above. You have no communications. You have no information about what is happening on the surface. And you know that above you, American surveillance aircraft are circling continuously, and that if anyone attempts to open any entrance, a precision-guided munition will land on that exact spot within minutes. There is no way out. Intelligence reports indicate that between 1,000 and 1,500 Revolutionary Guard personnel stationed at Khorramabad and Tabriz were trapped underground when the tunnel covers collapsed. That number covers only those two facilities. Iran is estimated to operate close to 100 underground military bases nationwide, with approximately 250,000 military personnel deployed within them, representing nearly one-third of Iran's total military strength of roughly 960,000 active personnel, 1/4 of an entire national army sealed inside their own shelters rather than deployed on any battlefield. That is an outcome unprecedented in the entire history of modern warfare. Generals had fled. Over 50 senior commanders had been eliminated. Barracks across the country had emptied out. Iran had simply never planned for this. And now my second question for you. I want you to really sit with this before you answer. Iran invested 40 years and tens of billions of dollars into these underground missile cities, the crown of their military doctrine, the foundation of their deterrent power. All of it was functionally neutralized in under a week. So here is what I want you to think about. What does this tell us about the future of military deterrence? In an era of precision-guided munitions, satellite intelligence, and electronic warfare dominance, does burying weapons underground still offer any real protection, or has that strategic concept been permanently retired? Leave your thoughts in the comments. There is no clean answer here, and I think the conversation will be genuinely worth having. Now let's talk about the strategic architecture that made all of this possible, because the decisions behind how this operation was executed are just as significant as the strikes themselves. The U.S. began with B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, aircraft that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars per flight hour to operate. They were used for the opening phase because stealth was genuinely essential for that work. Blinding air defense systems breaking open the hardest fortified targets that required precision and invisibility. But once air superiority was secured and Iran's radar networks were down, the mission changed fundamentally. Stealth was no longer necessary. What was needed now was volume, persistence, the ability to sustain bombardment continuously. So enter the B-52 Stratofortress, a design from the 1960s, with a flight-hour operating cost of approximately $70,000. Once the difficult work of the opening phase was done, these aircraft became flying arsenals. Cruising freely in controlled airspace, they delivered massive quantities of precision munitions to every target that attempted to surface from underground. This deliberate sequencing, expensive stealth capability first, then sustained cost-effective mass firepower, allowed the United States to maintain this operation for weeks without extraordinary resource expenditure. It was a lesson in how to economically strangle an opponent while militarily overwhelming them simultaneously. The deployment of 3 B-52H heavy bombers to RAF Fairford in the United Kingdom added another strategic dimension. Operating from British bases dramatically increased sortie rates compared to flying from across the Atlantic. American bombers established a rotating, continuous presence over Iranian territory, creating relentless psychological pressure on top of the military campaign. The United Kingdom's approval of airspace access sent a clear diplomatic signal. Iran's isolation was not a unilateral American position. It had become a coordinated international stance. 4 days after Operation Epic Fury began, CENTCOM reported that as of March 4th, Iran's ballistic missile launches had fallen by 86%. One-way attack drone launches had decreased by 73%. Admiral Brad Cooper confirmed that over 1,700 individual targets had been struck, and a major portion of Iran's missile stockpile had been physically destroyed. Iran had lost its functional ability to retaliate at scale. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth put it plainly, "This was never a fair fight. We're punching them while they're down." The broader consequences extend across the entire region. Iran's network of proxy forces, the so-called axis of resistance, is watching its central patron absorb catastrophic damage. When weapons, ammunition, and financial supply lines are severed, these groups cannot sustain operations on ideology alone. The protective umbrella they depended on has been torn open. The regional balance of power is shifting in real time, and the countries that have lived under the shadow of Iran's missile systems for years are watching their neutralization closely. At its deepest level, what Operation Epic Fury exposed is this: Iran built its entire defense doctrine around permanence, concrete, mountains, depth. The belief was that mass and immovability would outlast any offensive campaign. What the United States demonstrated is that technological adaptability, satellite intelligence, and precision targeting can systematically dismantle permanence. The mountains became traps. The tunnels became tombs. The weapon cities built to project invincibility became the most catastrophic liabilities in the history of Iranian military planning. A doctrine that took 40 years to construct was retired in 1 week. Operation Epic Fury did not merely destroy weapon systems. It collapsed an entire strategic identity and consigned 4 decades of Iranian military philosophy to history. If this is the kind of analysis you come here for, then Shannon Henry is exactly where you belong. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a breakdown. There is far more to cover on everything unfolding in the region. Thank you for being here. The world is moving fast, and understanding it clearly matters more than ever. I'll see you in the next one.